Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Musali, the new president and CEO of Western Costume, welcoming Designing Hollywood back to Western. You're at the biggest costume house in the U.S., the oldest costume house in the U.S. We've been around over 112 years now. We consider ourselves the one-stop shop for all your costuming needs here. With our two extra buildings next door, we're at roughly around 150,000 square feet. There are roughly 2.5 million costumes. If you need to get supplies, we can help you with that. If you need fabric, we can help you with that. Order fabric from around the world, anywhere you need. Deck out a full army if you want in our military department. Here's our supply store, catering to all your costuming needs. Thank you, Designing Hollywood, for coming in to see Western Costume. Hope to see you soon.
Today's guest is a costume designer with 25 years in the film industry. Her versatile yet distinct style has been showcased across a variety of genres and periods. Known for the Netflix series Mindhunter, she worked closely with renowned director David Fincher to create a restrained period look for the psychological thriller. Her current work includes The Iron Claw, along with Amazon's feature film Killer Heat. The Iron Claw is a vibrant yet very heartbreaking film that tells the story of the Von Erichs, a dynasty of wrestlers from rural Texas that spans from the 1970s to the 1990s. Killer Heat was filmed on location in Greece and stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Shailene Woodley, a contemporary whodunit about jealousy and revenge. Without further ado, it is our great pleasure to welcome Jennifer Starzyk to the Designing Hollywood podcast. Jennifer, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me and asking me to be here. It's my pleasure. Big fan.
Thank you. I'm a big fan. You know, I was talking and I wanted to start because I had to ask you. We talked about this a little bit. William Friedkin recently passed away. And he was one of my favorite directors. I met him a number of times. And you worked on one of his greatest works, written by the great Tracy Letts, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Tracy Letts playwright, Killer Joe, starring Matthew McConaughey, Thomas Hayden Church, Emile Hirsch, Gina Gershon. What a cast. I got to ask you, what was it like to be on set with William Friedkin?
Oh my gosh. It was super cool and super surreal. I do want to state that Peggy Schnitzer was the costume designer on it, but it was a very small movie with a very small crew. I think there was 4 of us.
Wow.
Like we prepped out of like a laundry room in like the, I forget which building is in Louisiana that people are familiar with in New Orleans. But obviously William Friedkin, like I was, so many projects since then. People are like The French Connection. This is inspired by this. So many projects that he inspires. And for that, I think he recognized he was at a different point in his career and he recognized what he was doing and how much it was going to take. But basically it was basketball season. So we had to always finish before the game started. And that was an absolute delight. Or let's say we had a night shoot and the game was on, we would find him definitely over at the screen watching the game. And I just loved that so much. He was super kind. He loved Peggy. I was just part of the crew. I was part of the prep costumer. But I very much enjoy working with that. And obviously Tracy Letts, it's, basically it's a play, it's so, it's a rom-com. I'm just joking, but it's so amazing to have been a part of it. And it was super fun. It was
rom-com. Yes. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Tracy Letts rom-coms, yeah. But it was one of my first forays also to working in New Orleans, and it was just a very special time. Quick, short, and super cool.
Well, before I geek out on you, and I'm going to, I'd love to delve into your history, your past. How did you find yourself working in the film business? Was it something you always wanted to do? And how did you get into costume design?
Yeah, I did not ever think I wanted to be in the costume world. I really wasn't even aware of it or a costume designer for that fact at all. I was very much interested in fashion. So I had graduated from high school, kind of didn't know what I was going to do, ended up going to community college. And when I was going to community college, I was like studying like Native American anthropology. I was not even in the realm of where I still was. And then all of a sudden I was looking at courses to take and I was like, these fashion courses sound really interesting. And after I took my first one, it was like, oh, I became a new person. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. So I ended up taking a bunch of courses there, transferred to Woodbury University. When I went to school there, they had a lot of instructors that crossed over with Otis and, you know, FIDM and Parsons, all these wonderful schools. So you were getting really great education in a small school. But I kind of had like my first mentor there, and her name was Louise Coffey Webb. She has since passed on, but she was a costume like archivist, and she did costume preservation, and she taught a historical costume class of some sort. And I just fell in love with her. She was kind of like this hummingbird, delightful person who just loved everything about costumes. And we hit it off. I was a little bit older than most students, and she at that time needed an intern for something. I forgot what she needed help with, and I volunteered to intern for her. And then we ended up interning on a bunch of stuff about my last year in college. By the time I graduated, I had like a full resume working with her, which was very important to me as well. And then I worked with her just for about a month or so, and she was the one that basically got me to the film industry. So we did a lot of costume archiving. So at that time, Warner Brothers was developing maybe their archive. So we would go to Warner Brothers and scope through all the vintage clothing, and I would look for the original labels. And if it says like Cary Grant or like Ronald Reagan wore this, I would pull that out. They were doing at that time also some sort of an anniversary celebration. I can't think of what that would be. It would be 1998. So and we helped dress those mannequins.
It would be the 75th anniversary.
Yes. So we helped them dress those mannequins and prepare those costumes. We also did something with LACMA, and I would also help intern at LACMA through her basically, and they were acquiring James Galanos, which is one of the most famous American couturiers. And I was at that time, I would sit next to May Routh, who was also just volunteering her time, and we were archiving his sketches. I mean, it was just like these like weird things I would do with Lulu that were like super cool and super fun and very informative, and like formed what I liked about costumes. But about a month out of graduating, we were working together in some other project of something like that, and she must have met an independent movie producer at a LACMA event, and he had called her and he asked if she would want to costume design a tiny little movie, independent, non-union movie he was going to produce. And she said, I don't do that, but perhaps my assistant would. So I get on the phone with him, and he was like, I'm looking for someone with some experience, but it sounds like you're very capable, and I'll keep your number, and if they need help, you know, I'll give your number, which is exactly what happened, which was crazy. And George Little ended up designing that film. And George Little is kind of from a lineage of costume people. And one of his credits is like Apocalypse Now. He's also since passed away from us, but he was kind of transitioning from being a supervisor to a costume designer, and took this project to kind of get his costume designer credits going.
Yeah.
And couldn't ask his friends to work for like $45 a day in a non-union film. But so we hop on the phone, and he was like, you actually sound like smart and capable. Like, I think I met him in person for like coffee, and then the next thing I know, I was hired. And the project was, it was like a $275,000 film, if I remember correctly, that Bryan Cranston, the actor, wrote. And yes, and he wrote it for his wife. And I think when I look back at the time period, it's before he was into Malcolm in the Middle. Obviously, he'd been an actor for years. But I think it was before Malcolm in the Middle, and obviously way before Breaking Bad. And he wrote this little movie. He wanted his wife to star in it. We filmed it out in Pioneer Town, which is like now this like really hip place out in Palm Desert that is completely changed since when we filmed there. And originally it was built in the 1950s, like Gene Autry and some other 1950s Western stars built this little town, which then became very like freaky deaky desert people. And now it's kind of like been gentrified and was like a hipster go-to stop off point to like take pictures, because it really is a cool place. It has like one of the first automatic pinball bowling machines, and it's just like a very interesting place. We ended up filming there. I was the only person that stayed there. The rest of the crew would like drive the 40 minutes out of the valley to like a normal hotel with like like a swimming pool, and I stayed at the motel there, which was not like what it looks like today, with like bats in my room. And And we shot it like in 2 seconds. Pappy and Harriet's, which is like also like the stopping off point for like Coachella people to perform. Like they weren't that. They were our caterers. I lived right there, so I would go there after work and like karaoke every night. And we just had a really great time. I just got bit by the bug. And I remember when George, he's only being paid a stipend, so we prepped it. We'd prep it. We worked out a deal with CRC, went home at night to his house, and his wife at the time, Carlene, is his supervisor. So she would show me how to do the paperwork. We did it like in 2 weeks. We went out to the desert. He stayed a couple nights. He showed me how to pull the line, write it all out, how I'm going to do laundry, how I'm going to set the rooms, how I'm going to take continuity photos, and waited like a day or two. And then he was like, I think you've got this. Call me if you have any questions. And like,
Wow.
So when he came to wrap it, we started talking. He had another film at that point, and he was like, would you like to do it? I'm like, yeah, sure. These are like carny folks. This is like super interesting.
Yes.
That's exactly. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize you could be creative with clothing in this whole other field aside from fashion design. At this point, I'm thinking I'm going to save my money, move to New York, and become a fashion designer. But basically, just out of happenstance, I got sucked into the costume world and been doing it ever since.
Well, it's interesting to me because I look at your career before you became a costume designer, just working as a costumer. You worked on a lot of really, I guess I would call them hip projects with a lot of like cult figures in a way. Like when you were growing up, you talked about how you were a big Twin Peaks fan, and we'll get to Twin Peaks. But like when you were growing up, what kind of a person were you? Were you into alternative music? Were you, because you said fashion, did you grow up as a fan of this stuff? Like, were you watching movies and were you watching TV shows as a fan? And what was that like for you growing up? Because the project you worked on, you worked on A Mighty Wind, a Christopher Guest movie. Then you worked on House of a Thousand Corpses for like Rob Zombie. Then you were working on Gilmore Girls and Little Miss Sunshine, Tony Scott's Deja Vu. I mean, you jumped around on all these projects with these incredible collaborators, and it's really interesting to see where you came from. And I just wondered, what kind of a person were you growing up?
And 6 Feet Under.
At 6 Feet Under. I wanted to party with you.
Well, I appreciate how many
Californication.
And Californication. You interview so many amazing people that I admire. I love this podcast, and I just always love how you love film and television, and you ask the best questions. Definitely, I grew up in a very small town, very like Norman Rockwell town called Westboro, Massachusetts, and like there was like nothing there. There was, at the time, it would be called Caldors and Bradleys. They're not even around anymore. But my mother was like super creative, and she was an interior designer, and she's got houses and books and magazines. She still is, but we got out of there basically. So like on the weekends we would go into the city. We'd go into Boston. My father was a pilot for Eastern Airlines, if you remember.
Oh, okay.
So we were able to like stay standby and take the shuttle to New York and like go for the day. So it was like, so I had this really cool upbringing unbeknownst to me, and it wasn't anything. It was just, we were doing our thing, and my mom just wanted to get out and like see things. We'd go on house tours. We'd go flea market shopping. We would go shopping a lot. Really, it was like the 80s mall culture.
Right.
And my mom in turn would dress me head to toe, and like at that time in grade school, like the secretaries would like call me over like the loudspeaker. So they were called secretaries then, they're no longer called that. So I would go to the principal's office so they could see what I was wearing that day. I mean, it wasn't that I was aware of it. It just was, my mom was dressing me. I was just doing my thing. I didn't think anything of it. But it definitely obviously made an imprint, and she loved old movies, and my aunt lived with me my whole life, and my mom and we would watch old movies, and my sister, and my dad was a pilot, so he wasn't there as much, but I remember the first movie, she loved scary things too, like cerebral or scary things, so she thought she could break me in young and maybe not be so afraid of things, and the first movie she had me watch was Wait Until Dark.
And, good one.
And Rosemary's Baby. And it was a double feature, and that completely backfired. And I was like afraid of the dark until I was like 20. We changed genres obviously. And then the next time we probably saw an old movie that it really, really made an imprint on me and it's still my favorite movie to this day, without a doubt, is Rear Window. We went to a revival theater to see it when I was 8.
It's my favorite Hitchcock film, and I've often said that Grace Kelly's character in that film is the perfect woman. She shows up with talk about fashion, with a perfectly packed overnight bag.
Mark
You know,
Ross.
military precision. I'm like, I've never met anyone like that before or since. You know, no one packs that small and yet is perfectly ready to go no matter what.
Well, it's just the slickiest of silks you can fit into a Mark Crossback. I sort of, it just was like, that was kind of where that was just my home life. And then maybe like when I got into high school and you kind of started to really like formulate things you liked. And,
Right.
you know, and you had a lot of John Hughes movie. I like texted Marilyn and I was like, let me just say, in my costume spirit animal is like Sloane Peterson meets Watts meets Ducky. You know, it's like these things that you just sort of like were drawn to yourself. And then as you got out of that, like True Romance and Party Girl and just
Okay.
Yeah.
Mad props for bringing up Watts.
Yeah.
Because there are two movies, and this is a pet peeve of mine that I do not understand. And one of them was a movie called Secret Admirer that starred C. Thomas Howell and Lori Loughlin. The other is, of course, Some Kind of Wonderful that Howard Deutsch directed, where Eric Stoltz clearly has the woman for him right in front of him and and I get it, Leah Thompson's very cute, all that, but what an idiot. He could have stopped. He could have not wasted so much time and money. Watts might be one of the most attractive teen characters in a film of the 80s. That movie does not get enough credit, but it's kind of the good version of Pretty in Pink. Not that Pretty in Pink wasn't good, but it's the correct version.
Absolutely. And in Pretty Pink, I'm drawn to Ducky, right? Like, you know,
Of course.
like, you know, those other characters in it. But
And Annie Potts. I want to go work for her.
oh God, I had a crush on her too. I mean, and so those are the kind of movies you start to like, and Twin Peaks was coming out then, and just you know, Harold and Maude. Then I started to, as soon as I started to drive, and I would have my, you know, and we were still shopping. Like that was still something I did with my mom and aunt up until, you know, like till now basically. But like we would go to flea markets because they were interior designers, so they would go to flea markets and you could really find really great stuff. Then it's now it's all on the internet. You can hardly find anything there that's not being sold everywhere else. But while they were doing that, I got into like vintage fashion. And then I did have a little moment where, you know, full disclosure, nobody hate me. I was like a total deadhead. So I started to sew some clothes to maybe like, you know, replicate that and sell at some shows. But I got out of that phase pretty quickly. And it was just kind of like a twofold of like learning how to sew, being interested in fashion, exploring these worlds of costumes. I thought fashion, this is the 90s. This was like the 80s, 90s, the height of fashion magazines being so incredible. Like you can't replicate those times, those editorial shoots that are just so magnificent. So you were just like eating all of that up all the time. And so when I finally was like, I think I'm interested in fashion, it really just clicked. But that was definitely my childhood. And that's sort of like how that works. Like, you know, just lots of books and magazines and always exploring, being curious, and like going and seeing things.
Well, no, I loved it. And I love that you have that background. And it speaks to, I think, the kind of, you had this great kind of winding road working with all these people that I'm a big fan of. And, you know, over the last 6 years, you've done some incredible things. Like we were talking earlier about Mindhunter. And I loved Mindhunter, and obviously David Fincher is meticulous, but the design of that whole show, including the clothes, were astonishing. And, you know, I'm curious, when you start working on something like Mindhunter and you're working with Fincher and his crew, where do you begin with something like that? Do you start with the scripts? Did you go research the actual beginnings of the behavioral unit in the FBI? Where does something like that start for you? Because you know you're going to be working with a taskmaster. So is that intimidating? Were you scared? Like what was that like working on Mindhunter?
Of course I was petrified. I mean, I was so nervous that I actually, like, when the season 1 ended, I got like physically sick. Like my body was like, enough stress and like worry, which I learned how to deal with going forward because it's David, like my first design job was for David Fincher. I mean, it was just insane. I was very lucky. And like you had said before, I sort of wound my way, and it took me a moment to realize I need to, if someone offered me a job, think about if you really wanted to work on it, because I sort of had fallen into it, and it's just kind of like a child, like falling forward, right? Like I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember I was in the trailer of 6 Feet Under, which I was very pleased on. Mark Bridges set the tone for that, by the way. He did the pilot in the first 4 episodes. And someone had turned to me and they were like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to design. And they were like, you need to focus on that then and make sure you pick all your other projects so you can get to that goal. And I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense, by the way. But when you're working and just showing up and not knowing what's coming next, it's like someone had to tell me that, basically.
Right.
And one of that, so jump forward to Trish Somerville, who is really the collaborator with David Fincher normally, had just done Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl. And forgive me if she did something else. I know she was the ACD on Fight Club, I believe. But so like that was Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was like just such a phenomenon. And I was just dying to work with Trish and kind of to see what it's like to be, around that designer. So David and her were designing this TV series called Idiosyncrasy, which ended up being shut down. But I was probably like the fourth or fifth person hired in the crew. And typically, at this point I was assisted designing or like one of the first people to be hired as a prep costumer. So I was like, I will do it to work with Trish. Like, this seems like a phenomenal opportunity. And when we had got there, it was just growing and growing exponentially as a Fincher project does. And it was basically like, okay, we have all this made to order. Who wants to gaff the made to order? And between the group of us, maybe between that group of us, I had the most experience doing that. But I also was just like, I'll do that. Like, everybody else had their own gigantic task. It wasn't like I took the biggest one, but I did that. And when you do that job, you're usually not in the office a lot. Like, you have to go and source the fabrics and check with your vendors, and you're going out, you're doing so many things. And I was just trying to kick ass for Trish, and I barely had very little interaction with her. So when Mindhunter came around and she reached out to me and was like, hi, I'm going to put your name into the hat for this, I almost fell over. Like, I probably did fall over. Like, I was like, are you what? And it also just goes to show, just not to like give like, an example of life, but like show up and do your best work in every job, because somebody is watching and notices, and you never know when your next opportunity is going to come from it. And to think that my next opportunity was to go design Mindhunter for David Fincher, I will like forever be grateful. I think at one point she was like, you have to stop thanking me. Like it was like such a cool opportunity. But yeah, so thinking about obviously David and his tone and his scope. And when I think our first meeting, I think I had a week, I put together a bunch of boards and we met in person, which I absolutely love to do. A lot of times now you meet on Zoom for everything. And when in person, it's just things happen organically so much better. I may have had a lot more 70s looking items in mind. And he was like, absolutely not. We're like, first of all, I don't even like the look of that, but like, we're going to go like timeless 70s. And I don't even know what word he may have used at that point. But that's all he had to say was like one word. And you're like, okay, I need to it's just about silhouette and colors and, conveying that within supporting the script. So, he is very collaborative. It's not like, but he does know what he likes. Like, like, you're not going to get like an iffy answer. And it doesn't matter what time you email him something, you're going to get a response within like 1 second. so it's like, you can move forward very easily with him. And I think I just showed up and did my work as I do. And that's how that project had gone down. And obviously once we started to get into a rhythm and I would see some of these frames he would set up with 5 of these FBI people, it was like a composition. It was just so beautiful. You start to obviously get your rhythm of what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm fascinated. You jump from that, and then you go to Bill and Ted Face the Music. And for Dean Parasol, who I'm a huge fan of because he made Galaxy Quest, and I love Galaxy Quest. You even worked on Star Trek Into Darkness, but so you go and do something like Bill and Ted, which is so far away from Mindhunter, and I'm curious, does the actual, can you take on anything when it comes to costume design? Does it matter the genre, or whether it's comedy, whether it's drama, whether it's period, whether it's not? For you, is every project, do you look at it as its own thing? Are there projects you're drawn to based on what they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good. I personally, there are genres I am not drawn to, and I'm not going to name them because perhaps if I received that script and thought about who's directing it or something else involved in it, I would be interested in it. But there's two major genres out there right now where I'm like, I won't watch it. This just doesn't speak to me. Bill and Ted, kindly Ellen Moroznik had put my name in because she knew the producer, Scott Proof. And she put my name with some other people's names in. So I think Dean met with a lot of people, actually. And it was so refreshing because actually after Mindhunter, what I was really getting offers on were like other Mindhunters, you know?
Right.
So, yes, when I was like, I just did that tone with one of the ultimately best directors. I don't really need to revisit that. What I need to do is build up my resume. So when I had the opportunity with Bill and Ted, which is like another full circle moment in life, like, you know, I completely recall when I watched the first Bill and Ted in a mall, you know, in a mall movie theater, very mall culture 80s, right? And
Whoa.
and in the back of I had gone down during like 2020 to clean something out of my mom's house. And in the very back of what was my childhood or my teenage closet, there was still a Bill and Ted poster. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't wait to show Alex. And so anyhow, when I received that script, I loved that script. I loved that movie. I thought it was so sweet. I thought it was so cleverly written. It's not like they just threw that movie out. They had been working on that movie for like a dozen years. Yeah. And when I met with Dean, I had just kind of broken it down to some boards. We met in person, looked over boards. I instantly liked him. I have to say, I had this great moment, which doesn't happen to me often, where I had a couple offers. And I was doing reshoots on Mindhunter, and I went over. I said, "Well, I'm going to ask David's opinion on which one I should do," because he knew somebody involved in one of the other ones. And I was like, "But my other movie is which I really want to do is Bill and Ted Face the Music." And he turns to me, and he goes, 69. He was like, "Who's directing it?" I said, "Dean Parasite." He goes, "Galaxy Quest? Yeah, that's your movie." Like it was sort of like a done deal. So I just had such a friggin' blast working on that and having such a complete opposite experience. And that's, you know, you kind of get into this business to mix things up. We don't go do the same thing for year in, year out.
Right, of course.
Yeah, so you kind of want to have an adventure and mix it up. But I definitely would look at, for me, it's a script by script basis. Like I never say automatically no. I always obviously give the respectful read and think about it. And nowadays it's harder because our industry's changed so much. So maybe you have to take a film or an interview when maybe you knew it would be a better project for somebody else. But now, like, you know, so it's kind of interesting how things are evolving on that scope as well.
Right.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was such a, like you said, it was a really fun movie. I really liked Bill and Ted Face the Music. I thought it was great. And Holland Taylor's in that. I love her. You know, I there was a movie where she played is it Legally Blonde, where she plays a professor at Harvard, I think.
Oh, she's been in everything.
Everything. I love her as an actress. I mean, anything she's in, she classes up the joint. So.
Oh my God, yes. She's so elegant and so cool. Yeah, she wrapped herself on that film. But yes, we had a blast, and just likes to collaborate and is a real actor's actor. You know what I mean? Like, so like everything's important. So I was so stoked they cast her.
Oh, it was great. Well, you jumped on something that I actually really liked this film. Lisa Joy directed it, and Hugh Jackman's in it. Reminiscence.
Yeah.
And Lisa Joy is that Jonathan Nolan's wife? And they did Westworld together, and then it was her directorial debut, I think, as a feature film director. I thought that was quite a gorgeous movie, and I really, again, like the work in it. I think it's criminally underseen, and I really enjoyed that. So you went from Bill and Ted to Reminiscence, a very different kind of a movie. What was that like for you to work on?
Oh, I also agree with you. That was criminally underseen. Of course, it came out in August of 2020. It's just such a confusing time.
Yes, it was.
I wish they could have waited because I think it would have really done well in this past year. But these things aren't in my control. Anyhow, working for Lisa. So Lisa, I mean, first of all, I was thrilled to meet with a female director.
Yeah.
And yes, her and Jonathan obviously do these like massive multi-million-dollar world building things because they've done a couple other TV series of that nature. So she wrote this. This was her passion. I mean, she's a delightful, cool, badass, you know, collaborative, just very like like let's hang and talk all the time because I want us to all make a really great movie. And I had the best experience working for her. She has a lot of repeat respect for her cast, which is a fabulous, diverse, amazing cast. And I think she made an elegant film that was super cool. It was a neo-noir. We knew we were going to hit some elements that were like classic 1940s, like Robert Mitchumish or something, you
Sure.
know. Yeah, right. Yeah, but we still had a little leeway there. And I absolutely, again, it was like those three. I just thought I was like, oh my God, I've hit the jackpot, like working on Mindhunter to like Bill and Ted to Lisa Joy's Reminiscence. It was like the coolest thing to me. And then 2020 happened. So yeah,
Right.
it was like, but yeah, we had an amazing time. So, and I hope that I bet she's writing something now. So I hope something else comes out of there too. That she just
Well, in that film too, you got to dress two of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, Rebecca Ferguson and Thandie Newton, and I'm curious. So obviously, working with Lisa Joy in a movie like this, are women and men directors are they different to work with, or is it basically the same for you?
Oh, that's interesting.
When it comes to the idea of fashion, especially when you're dressing people like Rebecca Ferguson and Thandie Newton.
Well, I can definitely speak on behalf of maybe just Lisa being the female director I worked with, so I can answer what it was like to work with her. Yeah, and I think there would be a difference, just like there would be. I think there's just undernote of something would be different, but Lisa definitely had a lot of premeditated thoughts into costumes. She'd already done some sketches before he started.
Oh wow.
Yes, and I have noticed quite often, more than not, if you have a female showrunner or somebody involved, maybe there are some more imagery that are costume based or fashion based.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's just in the realm naturally. Maybe not. I don't want to speak for everybody, but she definitely had a complete vision, I should say, right? So and amongst that vision, we could work it out, and obviously I could bring my own ideas to it. And I mean, Thandie Newton, I just freaking love her, and Rebecca, such a hoot. They were obviously such different characters, and you had like the badass tough tomboy type character and like the elegant sort of like sexy saucy, neat like a cabaret singer. So it just was so much fun to design that whole look and have kind of just one key look for Hugh to wear, and just kind of really think about the fabrics we could use. And it was a total blast. And so working with Lisa, I would say, yeah, definitely we worked together and collaborated. She had a lot of input into what her vision would be to execute as well.
And thank you for pronouncing Thandie's name correctly. I mispronounced it, so thank you for that. Because I know that she made it a point to make sure that she went back to the original pronunciation of her name. So that I think it's important to note. But yeah, I really enjoyed that film. I thought it looked great. It was gorgeous. It was beautifully shot, and I thought the work that you did in it was tremendous. And then from there, back to Killing. Or maybe not, going back to working on The Staircase, which was the dramatized version of the documentary series. Another thing that I really loved, and going from Reminiscence to The Staircase, which was again a mini series with a great cast. What was that like? I mean, I'm a huge Colin Firth fan. And Toni, Colette, I mean, again, two legendary performers. Michael Stuhlbarg, man, what a cast. What was that like for you to jump onto?
And let's also say Parker Posey.
Oh, I know.
I mean, that was like Parker Posey. So much fun. I mean, that's an interesting. So Antonio Campos, that was sort of his baby, and he was developing that. But he did have a female co-showrunner, Maggie Cohen, and again, like the two of them would come to us to talk about costumes, and he really did respect, all of Maggie's, contribution and input, and her thought into it. Was like they worked as a team. It was like really cool, and they kind of had their own. I don't want to say strengths and weaknesses because I don't know if they had any weaknesses, but they just, they knew how to bounce off each other very well. But definitely, I was unaware of that whole story. So when I received, I think they sent me like 2 or even like maybe the first 4 scripts. It was like before you met, you got a lot of information.
Right.
And so of course I also then had to watch the doc, and I was like, what is going on here? And I do think the owl did it, by the way, because the owls are not what they seem. But I just think like it was an opportunity. When I was looking at them, I was like, wow, this is kind of like normcore fashion. It was, now there's a lot of projects that kind of take place in the beginning of early 2000s, but this was sort of still one of the first few a couple years ago. And it was just thought, what an opportunity to kind of take all these ugly clothes and put these on these like magnificent actors. Like,
I mean, we didn't even mention that, you know, people like Juliette Binoche was in there, and Dane DeHaan and Sophie Turner. I mean, the cast was amazing.
The cast was amazing. The cast was so amazing, and they were all so cool. And they obviously were an ensemble and had a lot of scenes together, but really maybe taken apart. It was really Colin's, you know, TV series basically,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause we're talking about his story, but to have all those casts come in and out and do fittings, and you know, when you do work on an episodic, you know, the fittings never end, and so and everybody was just so kind and so gracious. And Antonio and Maggie, and Antonio just created a very, like, I think his first day was like he kind of got into it guerrilla style when he first started directing, very young. I think he has like some breakout story actually that was very young, and he lied about his age or something getting into film school. But and he just likes that spirit, and he also grew up like loving movies. He tells this story where he goes to see The Crying Game with his parents, and he had to sit in a different seat because they ran out of seats in the full theater. And at the end of the movie, he turned back, like announced it as the movie's still rolling, like, I knew it. Like he's just so adorable. I can't stand him, but he's very thoughtful and very you know, both like Antonio and Sean, they make these like elegant, very nuanced like choices, and I just really appreciate their work. So it was so much fun working on that, a limited series coming in out of 2020 into 2021. We really, everybody bonded there very much so. And I also, you know, you learn a lot from doing that kind of a project. And then you have this French actress coming in, and you know, she really definitely put me to work, and had a great time. I mean, she had like 126 changes or something, and she's only like in half the script, right? Like she has like a lot of changes. So we it was a lot of character work, and it was super fun, and it was super challenging, and I loved the reaction to it after the fact, like friends, that because it was accessible if you have HBO Max, right? So people could watch it very easily and didn't have to wait for it to, you know, stream or something. And they were just like, oh my God, I got to go watch the series now. Oh my God, I got to watch the doc now. Like they were like, depending on which way they started, right? And I just absolutely, I do have to say, like, shout out to Parker Posey, because like perfectly cast. I think she should have been nominated for something in there. And she's just like this, like it really exemplifies the theatrics, unfortunately, of our judicial system. And she's like dressed like always as a puritanical like churchgoer that's going to play the organ or something, like, you know. And just it was so much fun to be a part of that as well.
Yeah, I was lucky. I worked with her. I mean, I was on set on Superman Returns. She didn't have a great time working on the film, but she was absolutely delightful. I mean,
yeah,
I love her to death. Now, I'm curious, when you're doing something like that and you watch the documentary first, are you still able to be as creative as you want to be, having the documentary to look at? Did you feel that you had to emulate that, or did you feel that you had more, did you have creative leeway to do sort of what you wanted to do? Because obviously dramas are different than documentaries are. I mean, fictionalized pieces. So, or did you feel that you had to represent what you saw in the documentary?
Yeah, I feel like you definitely, you know, it's sort of the same like with Iron Claw. You have this baseline of like actual people and what they are wearing, and you have a lot of research already like very accessible to you, right? So you kind of already know their vibe. So once you start to hone in on that, you know, you can get their, and then they stop being real people and they become like characters, right? So, and we had to do a pretty extensive presentation, to the studio presentation, right, to HBO. So prior to that, I had really honed in on them, had their color palette, knew what their, I think Antonio was like, let's get everybody their color palette and the signature piece. Whether it didn't have to be something, you know, such a massive statement, like, but for like Patrick Schwarzenegger or somebody who was Todd, it was like a rugby polo and kind of like Abercrombie and Fitch, and like his color palette to me was pool balls. You know, it was like those like very bright, just very clean with stripes. and so on and so forth. So we sort of worked with that, and we had to go straight to Atlanta to work. So it was also, what can you gather from being on location immediately and not being able to access maybe all of your rental houses in Los Angeles and things like that. So so it was definitely those two things, and then kind of from there they have so many changes that you're gonna have to kind of work a little bit outside. But I think on that project particularly, I did stay true to what they were. We did a lot of replicating if we could, so I think that was where we landed on that.
Well, again, the work was great, and I'm just always curious because, obviously you want to be able to have creative leeway, but when you're given something, when you always have a baseline of what the real people look like, you can't deviate that much. You have to sort of have a fealty to what they actually look like, and again, jumping in, I guess we can get to the task at hand and talk about the Iron Claw, which again takes you back into the 70s to start, and the period piece. And I thought this movie, it's very funny because when I did not know this story, and I went into it thinking, is it going to be like Rocky? Is it going to be this triumphant story where, yo, Adrian, and it was not like that.
No,
it was not like that, and I have to say I thought this was a terrific film, but it's a tragedy, really, and although also it does have joyous moments. How did you come to work on the film, first of all, and how did you receive the material, and what did you think of it?
Okay, so Antonio Campos, who was the creator and showrunner of The Staircase, used to have a production company with Sean Durkin, who was the writer and director of Iron Claw. Yes, and it has disbanded. They had somebody else in there too, and I apologize, I forget the name, but it had fallen apart. But they had a lot of projects that still overlapped because these projects developed for years and years and years. Like I think, like Sean had something to do with Staircase at one point, and maybe Antonio maybe had something to do with that. Anyhow, but they picked their projects and it was their babies and they moved on. But they both did Marcy May Marlene, which was Sean's directorial, but I believe Antonio produced it. Anyhow, he gave my name, but they still met with several people. And so I had read the script. I did not know anything about wrestling at all, except for some preconceived notions or maybe Hulk Hogan, and that would be it, right? And then if I didn't know anything about wrestling, I did not know anything about the Von Erichs. So obviously, immediately after reading the script, and I went online and I looked up what the Von Erichs looked like, because of course I'm thinking it as a costume opportunity, really, right? So
and Ric Flair.
Yeah, and I was like, I see what the Von Erichs look like, and I was like, oh my God, universe, please, this is my project. I was just so into their Texas Americana and this beginning of wrestling costume aspect, but they weren't super costumey. Those guys did dude wears costumes, and
right.
And it was just, it looked homemade, but not homemade. I was just like, this looks like so much fun. And somebody had said something like it's the Kennedys of wrestling or something, and I was like, what are you talking about? First of all, let's not bring the Kennedys into anything. But after reading this Greek tragedy, basically, we're just like this whole family, these one by one, they get ticked off before their prime. They have so much to offer and you don't know what their lives would have been. I was like, I get it. And the nuances of wrestling, you've got this ancient sport that finds you in these very evocative positions, and you dress as a character, and you have to have choreography, and you also have to be extremely athletic. I was like, this is very interesting, and just loved it so much. And obviously Sean's take on just patriarchy and masculine traits, and I was like, this is an incredible dynamic film, and the costumes look like they'd be fun. Please, please, please. So that's how it came to be. So when it was offered to me, I was absolutely thrilled, and it was quick. We had a 6.5 week prep, and it was 6 to 7 week shoot. And I needed to have those experiences of Mindhunter and The Staircase to know how to break down and get 5 main cast into a 2-hour film and make sure, Zac's character, Kevin, has 60 changes. I needed to know how to make sure I could be hyper focused to execute all that and have some fun with costumes and make things and try not to rent everything, you know? So it was obviously, from my past experiences, being able to tackle that project and really work on it and execute the best I could, because I did have a lot of leeway there. Actually, I had tons and tons of boards and references and images, and then you kind of honed in and you're like, I get it. Okay, so David Von Erich is like a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, all things Western, you know. And
Right.
but like also dresses like a kid. Like I'll put a football jersey on with like my suede jacket and like my cowboy hat and my snakeskin boots. Like, you know, you're just like kids would come out like in like, you know, like in cowboy boots, like in a ball gown or something, right? Like you're like, it's just like very childlike. And Kevin being just like the all-American jock and kind of, and that is his whole shtick. Like his father's like, you're not good, you know, on the stick. You're not good like with your quick comebacks. But what he was really excellent was he was a wonderful athlete. And Carrie, of course, being Jeremy Allen White, is a rock star and has that like sexy charisma and very 80s poppy, you know, color palette and, you know, acid wash jeans and stuff. And just sort of thinking about those characters and fleshing them out, and Sean giving enough of a rein, but you know, just would say a few words and you knew what he was saying and could go forward with that. So it was excellent.
I mean, I have to ask, I mean, Zac Efron is a monster when he shows up. I mean, obviously he's a great looking guy, but his physique, what he did with his physique and how big he got, he was just huge. It was incredibly impressive to see. Did that make your job dressing him harder? I mean, he was huge.
He was huge. He came in pretty peak physique already. Like Jeremy and Harris came in and started to work out then. But like Zach came in fact, when I got him measured on the project she was on before, I knew the supervisor, and she was like, he's already outgrown her clothes. Thanks so much. You know?
Yeah.
So it was like, yeah. So it actually lent itself obviously very well because it was completely character work and he's playing an athlete, and you know, and Kevin's whole story is he really does start like in just like tank tops and t-shirts, so it's like knit fabrics, it's gonna like hang on him just correctly, and getting the Speedo, like, you know, we custom made all of his trunks correctly, so just getting that to fit right. And I mean, a couple times he would overdo it and we would have to like jump up a couple sizes in jeans or something as we filmed in continuity.
Right.
But for the most part, he kind of stayed at that. He came in that peak shape and he stayed at that peak shape, and it totally worked. And we're just able to, it was very open and collaborative too. He was like, I know we have limited resources and time. So like, if, you know, just like, let me know how I can be of help. So, you know, we would have to do a lot of fittings in his trailer in between or after he finished early for a day or something. And he was just, it was never a bother, always great, wanted to be there, loved all of his custom made stuff, was just like so thrilled about it. And I was like, am I the first person to put you in pleated front khakis? Because, you know, I did that with Colin Firth too, you know? And so I think I was, and I think I remember because he's been in a ton of stuff, right? So, but yeah, but it was, I just had, I had a great time fitting all those guys, and they did require a lot of fittings, and they all showed up for it, and which is, everybody was into becoming the character very much. So it was character work, and they were into it, and that's the best opportunity.
Well, I have to ask you, I'd be remiss because I don't have celebrity crushes except I have one. Lily James. Lily, and here's the thing I love about her. She can be Cinderella and be one of the most beautiful women in the world, or she can be like a dowdy school teacher, small town girl in a movie like Yesterday. You know, she's a chameleon, a total chameleon, or she can be Pamela Anderson. And again, I have mad respect for her. So I have to ask, like, how did you decide to dress her in this movie? And did she have, because she seems to have, I'm always impressed by the chameleon, like, she never does what I think she's going to do. And she must, in my mind, she must love dressing up as characters because she does such great character work in sort of a fearless way. Is that true? Or am I off base? Because, again, she's not dressed up in this movie.
No. I mean, 100% true. I also had a crush on her. First of all, I love, as a woman, I just, you know, identify as a woman, love actresses. So when I heard it was Lily James, I was like, oh my God, she's always going to look good. So that's not a problem. I she played Pam, and Pam, she probably had about 30 or so changes, even though she comes in later. And we see her a lot as a vet and stuff like that. But she Pam had the least amount of research available online, so it was somebody that kind of like could create a character around like on your own. And I basically pulled a lot of images from the Richard Avedon American West, and one which we completely recreated, which is the first time you see her, which unfortunately the way it was shot, we only see her head, but she has this like literally identical to the image, this calico tank top on that's made with eyelets and these sexy jeans. I mean, she just looks so amazing. And then this famous photographer called Nicholas Nixon, who did these like very just these portraits of like sisters in the 80s, and they're just very real and very soft looking.
Right.
Like
Okay.
like next door neighbor type thing. Like you know this woman. And those two things really resonated with Sean as well. So we kind of built this character around her, and basically you got all this masculine energy, and she's the grounding force, and she really is like they are still together. Like that's obviously a love that's lasted, and they seem to be
and they have a large family.
Yeah, and they have a large family, and they just seem super cool. So so it was sort of just making sure like that she was kind of, I started to cocoon her kind of like in knits and soft, and like at Christmas time she has on this like flannel, but it's a very 80s shirt with like ruffles, and just having a lot of fun. We had so much fun. I think we were able to nail most of her changes in like the first costume fitting, and kind of just like flesh out some things such as like the wedding after the fact. But and I mean, she gave me the biggest compliment, which was, I think it was like her last day, and she was like, someone go get Jen. And so I came to her trailer thinking it was going to be, just a request of some sort. And she was like, I have to tell you how much your costumes helped me with my character and all of your choices. And I was like, oh, like, like still, like I remember it. Like, that's what I'm telling you. Like, it was such a meaningful, that's so meaningful to costume designers, right? So, but absolutely, she's so dynamic. I love her so much. I just think she's such it's so fun to watch her perform. And speaking of Cinderella, there was no coincidence. I think I tried 2 or 3 wedding dresses on her, that when she got into that wedding dress, I was like, oh my God, hello, Cinderella. Like, you've got that tiny waist and the perfect décolletage, and we're going to do this giant skirt because it's the 80s. And it was just like, it was so much fun to dress her in that as well. So
yeah, it's good to hear, because it's so I really like seeing when an actress will fiercely just embrace a character and be so not have an ego about it. Like she'll do whatever. And I thought she was great in the movie too. And yeah, it's good to know. I love hearing that. My crush can continue unabated.
Ah, God, total gold crush on her. So I totally understand, man. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum would be revisiting Holt, right?
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you that question, because what's it like for a costume designer who's worked with somebody, an actor, on something previously? You already have that shorthand. What's it like when you get to work with somebody again? And how does that relationship between an actor and a costume designer develop over the years?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, when Sean was like, I think we're closing the deal on someone named Holt McCallany, and I was like, Holt! Like, he was like, oh my God, that's right, it's Mindhunter. Like, I was like, oh my God. And it just was the perfect fit. So, I was ecstatic to reach out to him, and he was ecstatic to know that I was there. Like, he was going into a whole new scenario, even though Holt's been doing this since basically the womb. Like, he was very happy to know that he had an ally already going into it, and he could just reach out to me and we could just talk character right away. Right. So I was so thrilled to reach out to him for that. And also, like, Fritz's character just being like, he is a silverback gorilla, and I think Holt has a little bit of that naturally in him. And he was that as Tench as well. But for like a costume designer's standpoint, like our Iron Claws starts, I think, 78, 79. It goes through like 90, 91. And Mindhunter was 77 through 82. So we had a little overlap there.
Yeah.
So it was kind of nice to revisit those years you've designed before, but completely do a whole new character as well. And the charm of costume design and being in the film industry. So that was like a blessing to me as well. But basically, Holt's biggest thing was like, he called me right away, and he was like, when he was Tench, he had gained a bunch of weight because he was, just fixated on work, unhappy at his home and his marriage. And, he became that character is what I'm trying to say. So he'd lost all that weight and gone back to where he normally was, and called me up and he was like, I'm in peak shape. I have to, the film starts in 1963 in trunks, basically. So he's like, I'm going to remain looking this way because we filmed that in the middle of our whole filming schedule. So I need something that's going to make me look like Fritz's body shape. And I was like, okay, so you need some sort of a fat pad. And, we couldn't get a fancy fat pad made, which are very expensive. So we ended up using like an Amazon pregnancy belly. We built that into a shirt with a tank top. And it was just like so delightful to like go into the trailer to talk about maybe some upcoming changes or something. And he would just be in his room with his glasses on, with just the belly, just like the pants unbuttoned, like running lines. And you'd be like, do you want to talk about tomorrow's change or something? Yeah. Like it was just like so much fun. And that character was like obviously very complex, even though it seems as though he has one note, which is like persevere and win. Like when you looked at the way he dressed, he always was stuck in the 70s. He's one of the two characters I kind of made a conscious choice to like repeat clothing because they'd only have so many.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I started to kind of get into like, hey, if we find anything with epaulets, just very military, like sergeant based, like I want to use that. So we've kind of found some shirts that had that, some everyday shirts. And then when it came to his belt, I was like, he's so super obsessed with this title. We need to find like the biggest Western belt buckle and like belt and kind of like have him wear that every day, kind of like representing the title belt. So it worked out great. But even like in that first scene, which is something Fritz did, like he wore a lot of like floral prints and kind of pastel plaids and things like that. And like country, Cracker Barrel looking stuff or something. And I just thought there was such a fun character kind of to like flesh out, and Holt wore that so well. And it really brings obviously into like the new nuance of just having this little floral prints, just like little touches, nods in here and there, and just being such a masculine figure was a lot of fun.
Now you also there was a lot of in the actual wrestling scenes in the movie. There was a lot of extras, a lot of. So what was that? How much of that were you responsible for? Did you just tell people or the extras to bring their own clothes, or did you dress everybody?
Yeah, typically, ideally, you'd like to do pre-fits for all of your background so that you, it's just so less chaotic on the day and you can see the whole overall picture before they go onto set, and maybe even your director wants to see them. But we just didn't have the time or resource or crew to do that for our show. So it had to be on the day. And we had about 20 matches. And originally we were shooting them all in about a 2-week span.
Wow.
At some point, I think someone got injured and we ended up taking a break from that, going to other scenes and coming back to it. But it was going to be quick. And they did shoot it pretty chronologically, which was kind of nice. So we knew we could start people backdated in the 70s clothes and end up more in an 80s vibe, to like mid 80s. But like that was a total blast. It was kind of, I don't know if they are still doing that, but at that time they were doing core groups of people because of COVID testing. So we had the same 150, 250 background almost for everything. Like one guy's going to be at a funeral, is going to be at the state fair, is going to be at
right.
Right. Like, yeah. So it's like, so you kind of did get to know the people very well towards as you went all in their body shape and you had their little closet and stuff. But that also requires everybody being organized and making sure you could do some timely laundry and stuff like that. So it became a big challenge, and it was just being hyper focused. I would, go in and help dress the background because, myself, and I had like a key player, Rebecca Diaz, that was like, I just love, we just would go in and hit it with a team of people. I'm not going to say it was just the two of us. And we would just dress those background every day. And we kind of just kept that in mind. Okay, what's this match today? Okay, it takes place in 1982. Okay, we can start to introduce this band T-shirt, or we can start to think about off the shoulder flash dance, or things like that. Like you start to do your pop culture moments into it. And that, keeping that in mind, once you go to watch the film, and I remember when I met with Mateus and the DP and Sean, they were like, it's super dark in there. We're going to use tons of atmosphere and smoke. So a lot of it's going to disappear, which was another reason why they only needed so many background. But, and that also lent itself to like how I would design the ring robes. Cause they're like, it's super dark. Like we need, like Mateus especially was like, we need anything that has some sort of reflection on the camera. So what ended up being like, what you thought would be like Joanne's fabric ended up being like this gorgeous, something from like B&J fabrics that you'd make 1930s, like, Panay velvet with lurex thread,
Right.
stuff. And like we're making their ring robes out of it for wrestlers that are going to be taken off almost immediately before even getting into the frame, So it was fun. But anyway, back to the background. So that was basically our background story. And I think the day we shot the wedding, we started the day with a funeral, we ended with a wedding. And something happened in the middle of that day too as well. So it was like you had your racks for the funeral, dress all the people. Then you had your next group come, move those racks aside, next racks come in, dress all those people. And then you get the wedding racks out, wrap them out. And it was like, the wedding to me was like, if it was like Lawrence Welk meets 16 Candles, then we've got the tone right. So that was how it worked.
I've often felt that kids today just don't know what it was like to have to sit through Lawrence Welk on Sunday nights. Like
thank goodness.
I mean, it was one of those things that there was always something coming on after Lawrence Welk, but you'd want to see it so badly you'd end up watching the last 15 minutes of Lawrence Welk. Yeah. I mean, it's something that kids today they just don't even know.
No, but it was there was some wonderful thrifting down in Baton Rouge, so I really gobbled it up, and it was lending itself to these very high church going sort of gowns, but out of polyester and even polyester lace, and it was just like it was so much fun. And that was a really fun day. Of course, it was a very long day, and I think we ended like taking the clothes off the background in like a very unlit area or something, but it was like in between all of those notes, it was so fun to be like, okay, now we got to go run over here and do this. And, you just had to be very much engaged and very much on your game and very much in a good mood and in that frequency, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as tragic as the story can be, the film looked like it was a lot of fun to make. It was certainly fun to watch. I mean, just looking at, I was involved in a group of people. I didn't know much about wrestling either. And I was supposed to play a character. It was kind of like this trivia thing that was based around wrestling. And they told me to go look at Ric Flair. Oh. And I didn't know anything about Ric Flair. So one of the first things that I was interested in seeing when I saw the film was, how were you going to portray Ric Flair? Like, what was that going to be? And I was like, all right, you did a good job. And because he was a singular character, and the whole wrestling world, I really liked everything that was done in the film, and it was very evocative of wrestling. Was something I never really understood, until later in life. So
yeah,
it was not my thing.
I'm a fan because it's like you don't realize it is live theater, right? Like if you you're like, this is really actually a cool, fun sport, and and they're very dedicated and obviously tremendous athletes. So it's like now I'm a fan because now I see it in a completely different light. And
yes,
Ric Flair, I mean, how friggin' cool. Like, it was like Liberace meets Zaza Gabor with Nature Boy on the back. I mean, it's just like, it's just a fun, tongue-in-cheek, like these people, like, his persona is just hilarious. I love it so much. So it was, it was very, after I designed all the other robes and knew that we were doing primary colors, it was like, I need one of his, standout, like, flamingo pink peacocky robes, right? Yeah, exactly. So, so it was so much fun doing that. And it was obviously, people love that, and I'm glad they do.
Oh, it was so much fun. Now, before I let you go, we always ask people, like, obviously with social media the way it is, and people can see things now on Instagram, and what would you suggest if somebody wants to get into costume design, whether it's for movies, whether it's for videos, whether it's for television, whatever, fashion even? Where do you think people today should start their journey in terms of building a career? How do you start? Because I've heard a lot of, there's a lot of costume designers that had a very academic background. They came out of art school. Then people had gone into fashion. And I'm always curious, how much does, we learn by doing, obviously. And while I would recommend school and having theories and an academic foundation is fine, but on the other hand, you don't learn as much as you do when you get on that job and you learn daily, day in and day out, things that they can't teach you in school. How would you just tell people to get into the profession?
Yeah, that is very interesting. I mean, I feel like you're absolutely right. I did go to school and I graduated and I have like a bachelor's, but like so not necessary, right? And and I went because like in my family it would be like, of course you're going to graduate from college. It wasn't like something like it just seems like that's what you do in your next step. But no, I don't think you need to. Of course, I was able doing fashion design to study historical costume and how to make clothes. I
Right.
learned and fabric choices. And so I already had that knowledge coming out. And of course, you're going to only know so much doing it in school, like you said, until you start doing it and you really have to like expand on that knowledge. But I did come out knowing those things, which I do think was just maybe helpful for me, you know, and or being a part of someone else's crew if they asked me to do something. But it's such a good question, and I've had some people, maybe you know, strangers, DM me on Instagram, and they're like, and
Right.
I don't even know how to answer it for them. I'm like, there's also, anybody has like, if take for instance, listening to this podcast, everybody has a different story of getting into the industry. Like,
Everybody.
it's so interesting. So I feel like you really don't know how it's going to happen, but believe, like if someone wants to reach out to me and they're like, I'd love to PA for you. Well, first I'm like, where are you located? Because a lot of
Right.
times they're not even in the same state, right? So I'm like, okay, you know, I don't know where to go with that. But I just think, yes, I think you do need to reach out. You need to be one-on-one. And I just think, you know, I wish there was more internships because a PA is a paid position and this is like a big thing nowadays. But if there was just a few more internships and someone could just come in, because you kind of really do get to know if someone has it, you know, and
Yes.
to work in this industry, it's requires so much more than, it's such a interesting industry to work in. First of all, you're just devoting so many hours of your life, so you kind of just know if someone's super hyper observant and really cares, and they're just going to do little things that they can remember something as silly as like, oh, I know you like extra ice, or just something where you're like, oh, you're paying attention. I can tell you're paying attention. It doesn't even have to be about clothing yet, right? Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, so I feel like but that's very difficult to know how to have people get into the industry. But you know, we've got lots of studios out there and lots of people doing things, and I think we should give a lot more opportunities to people to get into the business. And one of the few things I did was I did do an internship at a costume house. It was Costume Corporation. It has since gone under, but you know, and when I did that, I saw Joseph Perot design like 13, and I remember he came into work one day with like, and like people came up to him and he was like smoking a cigarette and they had like 1930s scarves dangling from a thing, and he was like, that one, and like went into his office, and I was like, what is this job? What is going on here? Like, this is so amazing. And I remember they needed extra help one day, just taking at that time Polaroids of background fittings, you know. So it's like you never know how you're going to get into the industry, but I think you need to obviously get close to the industry, see if you can get involved one way or another, even if it's you're in art department but you want to do costumes or something, you know. I just think there's always an in, and it's very easy then to mix around once you get there.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. I mean, as much as I went to film school and watch a lot of movies and thought I didn't know anything. The first day that I was on a set, which was, I told you, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and I was working for the art department, anything I thought I knew went out the window. And the actual practicality of learning how to, I mean, I was a social person already, but you know, when people say it's not just what you know, it's who you know, but it's also how you can interact with people. If nothing else, movie making is a very social business. And
Yeah.
like you said, be observant, but you also have to be a student of people, because you're dealing with the whole microcosm of civilization. That's what I love about, like you had said earlier, the gypsy caravan carnival atmosphere of this business. You have to have a certain mindset to get into it. I think ultimately you have to like people. You have all kinds of people, because you'll meet them all.
Yes, yep. And if you're in costumes, you are really, not only you're dealing with the people in the whole entire crew above and below the line, but you're doing the one job with hair and makeup that you're dealing physically with a cast, with somebody living that's performing in front of the camera. So it's a whole nother realm of social skills as well. And yeah, definitely, you know, it definitely all works together. So.
Well, I think it's funny with costume design, people don't understand that you have to make it so an actor doesn't think about their clothes. They have to already know. They have to trust you and trust what you've done so they can concentrate on their character, because it's the last line, or it's the last part of the character they put on before they step out. Last looks, of course, hair and makeup, but that the clothes make the person. The clothes make that character. So it's a vitally important aspect of the business. I think a lot of people don't understand how important it is, at least for actors. They have to trust you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes they do. And obviously we have our own campaign of making sure, with pay equity and all that sort of stuff going on. I mean, everybody's, it's all encompassing. We're part of the visual arts. What I think is interesting in a project is, sometimes if you have something that's a non-union, low budget, I don't even know these films, but maybe they're coming dressed in their own clothes, fine. But have someone go to their house that has actually a visual knowledge of what they're going to look like in the set, and bring something else to it, because costumes can add and do add so much to the picture, and we're making entertainment, so it's like, let's entertain. And to me, it's like Wong Kar-wai, like these movies that are, you can just show me a still, I don't need to watch the movie, and I want to watch the movie.
Did you just bring up Wong Kar-wai?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, you're so up my alley. I mean, first of all, I'm a huge Wong Kar-wai fan, but In the Mood for Love is, I mean, I want to dress like Toni Leung. I just want to wear linen suits from the 60s and stand in the rain for the rest of my life and look cool. And walk in slow motion down corridors and barely touch like Maggie Cheung's fingers. I want to live I mean, people talk about living in, maybe French films like Jules and Jim. No. I want to live in a Wong Kar-wai movie in Hong Kong in the rain for the rest of my life.
That's what I'm talking about, and that's a visually beautiful movie, and and you can still have restrained beauty as well. But I mean, it's just, there's so much to making a film so beautiful, and I think that's kind of stuff that turns me on too. So it's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because people don't know Wong Kar-wai as much as I would have thought. Like, when Quentin Tarantino hit it big in the mid 90s, when he'd made Pulp Fiction, he started his own releasing company called Rolling Thunder. And one of the movies that he brought was Chungking Express to America. Now, I'd never seen a Wong Kar-wai. I had not seen a Wong Kar-wai film before. Yeah. And I was just knocked out by Chungking Express. And then the movie Fallen Angels was going to be part of Chungking Express, and it became its own thing. And those two movies together made me, and then In the Mood for Love, he hadn't made that yet. But, I mean, I'm a huge fanatic, Wong Kar-wai fanatic. And In the Mood for Love, I think, is one of the great, beautiful films of the last 30 years. I mean, any movie fan and costume fan.
Absolutely.
The costumes in that movie are stunning.
Yes, exactly. So, and and I just think, that's just goes to the relevance of how important costumes add and are, and there's scenes without dialogue, right? And they just looks amazing, right? So it's just so cool. Yeah,
I mean, as I said, linen suits, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And Toni Leung, man, if I was Chinese, I'd want to be that guy. I first saw him in John Woo's Hard Boiled, but then when he and then he was in a Marvel movie. He played Shang-Chi's dad.
Okay.
He's Wenwu. Yeah. And he had great linen suits in that movie too. Actually, I don't know if they were linen. They were were heavier, but still. Anyway, I digress. I thought your work is great. I've loved speaking with you, and I don't want to keep you much longer because we've gone over time, but I feel like I could talk to you for hours.
So you're so kind, and I think you do such a wonderful job at what you do, and thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Oh, this was fantastic. Jennifer Starzyk, thank you so much for being on the Designing Hollywood show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at RMBurnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at Post Geek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.